Hello everyone, and welcome to your no-nonsense beginner guide on how to play the bird's opening with pawn to f4. So before I get into the theory, I want to talk about why we play f4 in the first place. The point of this move is that we're controlling the e5 square, and that idea of controlling e5 will continue for the entire game. Our next few moves will almost always be knight to f3, control the square even more, and also b3 and bishop to b2 to once again control that square even more. And in the future, because we have the e5 square so well defended, we will eventually plop this knight onto e5, and once we do that, that will cause a lot of problems for black because we will have an extremely well defended centralized knight. Alright, so what are black's responses here? If black plays just about anything, you will have one setup that you can play, which I will show you, except if they play pawn to e5. This is the Fromm's Gambit, and objectively it is not the best. However, if you do not know what you're doing, you can get checkmated extremely fast, hence why I am showing it first. So, e5, you are going to accept the gambit, and the reason it is so dangerous is that now this diagonal here is very, very weak. So black will most likely go pawn up to d6 here. This is their best option. You're going to capture, they will capture back, and because of both their queen and their bishop potentially coming in, you're going to play knight to f3 here. Control this square from the queen, and black has two main options here. If they go bishop to g4 and attack the knight, this is not a challenging option at all. You'll simply go pawn up to e3 here, get the queen defending the knight, and after something like knight to c6, bishop to e2, let's say knight to f6, you can simply castle here. You'll then go pawn up to b3, bishop to b2, and you are up a pawn here, and even though you are a little cramped, black cannot really attack you, and they do not have much to show for being down a pawn. So bishop to g4 is not a very strong option here. What is much stronger is g5. This is the Lasker variation, and it looks a bit ridiculous, but the idea here is pawn up to g4, kick the knight away, at which point their queen will be able to come in with lots of problems for us. So after g5, you are going to play pawn up to g3, trying to shut this diagonal down. Black will now push up to g4 most likely, attacking our knight, and we're going to move it to the side on h4. And even though knights on the rim are usually grim, in this case, black cannot really punish us, and they are still down a pawn. So once again, black has two main options in this mainline position. The first one is bishop to e7, trying to immediately attack our knight, and we cannot let them capture, because then after we capture, their queen would get in, and that would be absolutely terrible. So you have to back the knight up to g2 now, hence why we played pawn up to g3. And black's best option here is to try pawn to h5 and h4. However, here you simply go pawn up to d4. The idea is that we are opening up our bishop, and after h4, we do not want to capture because once again, then their bishop and their queen would get in. So you have to play bishop to f4 here, simply defending the pawn with the bishop. Black has now run out of steam, and they really do not have compensation for being down a pawn. So that's what to do against bishop to e7, but their other main line here is knight to e7, simply developing the knight, but their king side is completely ripped open, so castling on that side is a complete no-go for them. And the move you want to play here is d4. And there's a very specific reason you want to go d4 immediately. The idea is that after knight to g6 here, trying to trade off the knight, you are going to capture, and after they capture back, black now has a threat here of capturing the pawn because this rook here is pinning it. So what you're going to do is queen up to d3, which is why we played d4. Now the pawn is defended, and once again, I think black here runs out of steam. You will go pawn up to c3, bishop to g2. You'll rotate this knight to the e4 square, and while black does have some long-lasting pressure from the pawn on g4 as well as the open h-file, I do not think they have full compensation for the pawn, and you have very good chances in this position. So that is how to handle pawn up to e5, the From's Gambit. Make sure you know that. But now let's get into their other lines. And here, black can play about a million different things. They can go d5, they can go c5, knight to f6, knight to c6, d6, e6. The point here is that no matter what they play, unless it is pawn to e5, you can play in pretty much the exact same way. So let's look at pawn up to d5 as an example. The first move you're going to want to make is knight to f3, controlling the square and developing your knight. Then after black plays their move, you'll then go pawn up to b3. Remember those ideas that I mentioned in the beginning? You can see all of them happening right now. You will go bishop to b2 and control the e5 square as much as you can. So black will now go knight to c6 here. You go bishop to b2. And the good thing about controlling the e5 square so much is that pawn up to e5 as a break for black is very difficult to accomplish, and that is a very good thing for us, because if black can get e5 in successfully, chances are that is going to be very bad news for us. So most likely black will just continue developing normally, knight to f6 here, and you now go pawn up to e3. Opening up the bishop, and its bishop wants to go to b5. The reason is to trade off for this knight here, because then e5 will no longer be contested. And once again, black has a lot of different things they can play here. I'll look at pawn to e6 as an example, but once again, all these ideas that I'm showing are a kind of setup that you'll play in pretty much every single time here. So after pawn up to e6 or whatever move they play, you want to go bishop to b5. Attack the knight and hopefully trade it off. If black simply provokes you with pawn to a6, this is a very bad move because you're going to capture this knight anyways, and after captures, in some openings, having these doubled c-pawns can be a good thing, but this is not one of them. Black simply does not really have any reason to have the doubled c-pawns, and after simply castles here, you just have a nice advantage. Instead, what is probably best for them is to try bishop to d7 and undo the pin and capture back with the bishop when we do eventually capture. And by the way, we will always capture this knight or some piece sooner or later around this area. So here you're simply going to castle. Let's say black develops bishop to e7, preparing to castle. You want to go d3 here. The idea is to rotate this knight to d2, and potentially this knight, when it goes to e5, can come to f3, and then both knights can be defending the e5 square, and you will have just a great time. So black will most likely castle here. Now knight to d2. Now black will go a6, and in this position, now we're going to capture because we are provoked. They will capture back, and now we plop the knight into the center. Knight to e5 here, attacking the bishop, and black's best move here is like bishop back to e8. This is extremely inhuman. No person would ever play that move. Instead, the most common move here is queen to c7, defending the bishop, at which point you have a few options. You can play knight d2 f3, like I mentioned earlier, just keeping this knight defended in center as much as possible. You can also try queen to f3, but the most promising line here is likely rook up to f3. The idea is to try and rook lift this rook to either g3 or h3, and then get your queen into the attack, and black is going to have a little bit trouble defending on that side because our pawns and their pawns have kind of closed off their pieces from seeing that side. For example, if black goes knight back to d7, which is the second most common move, simply attacking the knight and preparing pawn to f6 to try and really get that square, we now go rook to g3, and if black goes f6 now, then queen to g4, and you're winning. There are about 60 games in this position. Simply queen takes on g7 is too strong, and black cannot handle it, and you are completely winning its position after rook to f7, knight captures, king captures, queen captures on g7. You are completely winning there. So that can just show you how dangerous this can get for black if they are not very, very careful here. Their best move here is probably like d4 to try and open up their bishop to see the rook, but simply e4. f4 here. And even though your bishop is now blocked out, which is not very good, black's pieces as well are also blocked out. This bishop is staring at this pawn, this knight is staring at the pawn, this bishop is not doing much back here. And your plan in this position is to once again to try and instigate on the king side, move the rook to either g free or h free, try and move your queen in. And I think your chances in this position are absolutely fantastic. Alright, thank you so much for watching. That was your no-nonsense beginner guide on how to play the bird's opening. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time.